Hello, and welcome to the Bridgework Artist Talk. I'm Elizabeth Shoshany-Anderson, the lead curator at Arts and Literature Laboratory, and I'm joined by artists Kel Mur and Gillian Drier. This Artist Talk is presented in conjunction with the exhibitions currently on view in Arts and Literature Laboratory, Kel Mur, REAP, and Jillian Dreyer, Ideas, Ideals, Criticisms, and Concerns. Sponsored by Dane Arts, Bridgework Madison is the Dane County chapter of a multi-state project founded by Jason S. Yee and Leah Kolb of Plum Blossom Initiative based in Milwaukee, and joined in 2017 by Arts and Literature Laboratory. Bridgework provides critical opportunities for emerging artists to broaden the scope of their professional connections and experiences. Bridgework endeavors to forge a more interconnected arts community throughout the Midwest and Wisconsin by facilitating meaningful artistic exchanges and dialogues among artists and art-centered organizations and professionals. The emerging artists invited to participate in this project express the energy, commitment, and willingness to benefit from the resources and guidance provided by each region's facilitators. A culminating group show brings together a diverse group of artists who are dedicated to their practices and poised to fully engage the contemporary art world. Kel Mur and Gillian Drier will represent Madison in this year's group exhibition at the Alan Preeb Gallery at UW Oshkosh from March 29th through April 14th, 2021. If you or someone you know is interested in becoming a Bridgework artist for next year's program, please keep an eye on our site at artlitlab.org for an announcement about the new Bridgework application opening. The exhibitions will both be on view at Arts and Literature Laboratory from January 14th through February 27th, 2021. Tonight, we will hear from Jillian Dreyer and Kel Mur about their exhibitions, followed by a live Q&A portion with both artists as well. If you have a question at any point for either artist, please put it in the comment box and I will be sure to pass it on to them. We're going to hear first from Jillian Dreyer with a presentation about her exhibition, followed by Kel Mur. Jillian, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, thank you. Let me get my presentation booted up and we will get started. So my show is called Ideas, Ideals, Criticism, and Concerns. My name is Jillian. I got a BFA from UW-Madison back in 2017 in painting and graphic design. So that's a little bit about my history. I traditionally have done painting and colored pencils as media. So this show was definitely stepping out of my comfort zone as far as the subject matter and the materials that I used. Historically, my work has focused a lot on Blackness, and within that, Black masculinity, joy, relationships with like the earth and plants. And so this was kind of a further extension of that. And I had a really great time making this work. And so I'm super grateful to Art Lit Lab for supporting me as I work through these topics. Actually, let me jump back first. So one of the first things that I'm going to share is the kind of prompt that I shared with the people that I got the community responses from. And then I'll talk about how I kind of got to that process, and then I'll get to the artwork. Oops, looks like it's not quite working. Here we go. So here's the statement that kind of was the catalyst for the statements and art that I created out of those statements from people. And I'll just read that really quick. The toll that our world has put on Black bodies, physically, mentally, and emotionally, is supermassive. It's generational. It feels like rot. We work as a community and as individuals to make things better, all while under the strain of surviving in our daily lives. I want you to imagine a future. It's a scenario of your choosing, maybe a fictitious future that you get to be a part of, a future where your children or children's children live, or a future that you can simply see in your mind's eye. What does it look like when you or we have risen above just survival? What does your day, your community impact, your success, your health, your family, your art, your life look like in a world where Black people can finally rest and the work is complete? How would it feel? How would you feel? Share in a sentence, in a paragraph, share in a story, share in a poem or in a song. This is your idea of Black power and Black future. So jumping back multiple years, I attended a summer sewing camp with my grandma and my cousin. And I was recently thinking about that experience and how after we finished that camp, I got really into quilting and sewing. And that relationship between sewing and storytelling has always been something I've appreciated and haven't really incorporated into my work very much. And the idea of storytelling through crafts is also something that I really appreciate. And I've never really felt that I've been very adept at craft and 3D work. So it's always something I've kind of, shied away from. And quilting came back into my mind as we worked through COVID. Quilting has always been a community activity. Quilting bees of people getting together and making quilting squares together and sewing them together and storytelling together. And through the summer and through this year, with COVID being at the forefront of all of our conversations, it's been really isolating. And that community aspect for a lot of people, I think, has kind of leached away and become something more different. And so as I started to work on this project, I really wanted to incorporate kind of my own version of storytelling and quilting kind of under the lens of COVID. And that led me to beading these small, intimate my take on quilting squares that are pretty much just beads. And another part of this that became really great was the ability to take time to reflect while I'm making these really small objects. And working through the protests in the summer, my mind was kind of scattered, like I think a lot of people's were, especially people in the Black community. We were all kind of struggling, I think, more than other people. So the question then for me came, what can I do to be productive during this time for myself? And the idea of exploring what Black future looks like became my thought process. And so I made a poll based on this question, and I opened it up to people to respond, to Black people, and just kind of tell me their thoughts, their ideas, books they've read, content that comes to mind when looking back at this question. And I got a crazy amount of responses that were beautiful and sad and just across the whole spectrum. And it was a really powerful project for me to spend time with. So moving to the actual work. So this is one of the quotes that I got. I'm gonna just really quickly talk through one of these specific pieces that I made and then show a couple other ones. So one of the quotes that I got, it was anonymous, so I don't know who sent it to me. The quote was, "I imagine it like Tulsa in 1921, but even better." And I think this was my favorite statement, kind of tragically favorite, obviously, if you know the history. So I spent a lot of time after I got this looking back in Tulsa and Greenwood archives. If you're unfamiliar, there was a massacre in Tulsa, which was a booming Black community back in the 1920s. And it was really tragic. Lots of people were killed. And before that, it was this beautiful community where there were doctors and Black-owned businesses, and it was just thriving. And it could have been so much if it hadn't been destroyed. So this statement was really powerful for me. And I think a lot of people kind of have that craving for community that Tulsa, or not even Tulsa, that Greenwood was. So I found this picture in the archives. It's of the Greenwood district, Greenwood Avenue, in 1917, so a couple years before the massacre. And it's one of the very few pictures that is just a clear picture of before the bombing and before that's the kind of legacy that it had. So it had a lot of weight for me. And I wanted to incorporate this into one of my beading pieces. So I spent a lot of time working on these kind of digital collages to figure out how I wanted to lay this out. And so I came up with this idea of a party in the middle of the night. And I think it was a combination of craving and missing that from COVID, and the idea that this city was just still here and untouched. And I want it to be something really joyful and high energy and beautiful. So I started, I had felt, and I started drawing out some of these ideas and beading. I learned a lot of trial and error during this. I ripped out a lot of beads, and I had a lot of beads on my floor, and I realized that this was not easy, laying things out, working this small. I've never worked this small before. And it was so challenging, and it was so worth it to sit and kind of be quiet with the thoughts that I had about a lot of these topics. So not just this one, but as I'm working on each one, I'm kind of thinking about the subject matter and about the person who, decided to submit what they submitted to me, and being really grateful that so many people were willing to share their ideas with me, and letting me interpret them. So this was the start, and this ended up being the final product, with the quote alongside. Again, I imagine it like Tulsa before 1921, but even better. So all I know is that person is 25 years old. They didn't share a location. They didn't share anything else. And I hope I did their words justice. This really became for me a reminder that the words are just as important as the art. Coming from someone who generally doesn't work from like direct quotes or from direct facts and kind of works more like experientially. This was a really good reminder for me to put a balance between both and get to use some of my like design skills to make sure that one isn't overdoing the other and that they kind of support each other. So that one was my favorite one, and that's why I wanted to share the process. Not sure how much time I have left. I didn't start my timer, silly, but hopefully I have enough time to get through the rest of these that I wanted to share. So this was another favorite, and this was more abstract. If you know my art, you know that I tend to not work really in abstract shapes. I often depict people as subject matter, or hands, or like something physical. So this was a challenge for me to kind of rethink in more of a how will the color and like the bead size and the different combinations convey the words that I'm trying to convey. So this quote, I'm sorry, it's kind of small, says, "Free, a complex mix of Black subcultures where we are free to explore our identities in safety." And so I really wanted to bring out these like jewel tones and kind of richness and have a combination of order, but also a little bit of chaos and a little bit of brightness throughout each of these pieces. And I think the thing that really kind of unites all these things for me together is that, of course, Black people aren't a monolith, and there's all these different ideas about what Black future looks like. And they all come from people's individual perspectives and how they grew up and how they were raised and how they've seen the world around them and how their families reacted to the world around them and the books they've read and the people they've met. And each of those things is incredibly special and valid. And there's beauty in every single perspective about Black future. And I wanted to convey that in the work. I think that was like, if I could, pick one thing to say about it, that was my goal. This was a book from an excerpt of Farming While Black, which was a book that someone recommended that I read because I think they knew that I liked plants. So they sent me this book on farming, and it was an incredible read. I didn't quite finish it. I'm planning on finishing it soon, but I also recommend it. And I really like this quote: "In the struggle for civil rights and human rights, Black farmers have always been there. We've endured the test of time with a resilience and resolve. Our power is in the soil, the land, the earth. Our skin hues are a testament to our belonging." And it was just a reminder that Black liberation and Black future is in every single thing we do. And farming is liberation. And this was such a good project to remind me that I need to open my scope as far as what Black future is and how it's attained and achieved with all of these goals that people have. And then as a last slide, I believe, this one I really appreciated as well. It talked more about kind of the sociology of about how Black people are perceived. And this has gone back into work that I've explored about Black masculinity. But the quote is, "Where Black men didn't have the toxic pressure to be masculine and strong and could afford feelings and be able to cry, be affectionate and do as they please without having their sexuality questioned." And I tried to make this piece that kind of balanced those words, again, through color, through shape, the geometry and lack thereof, and grids. And I think it's just worth noting that, everyone has their different ideas of what it should look like. and everyone has these ideas that they think are worth noting. You know, I provided a form and there was a short answer option, and some people just dropped a few words in, and those were the words that they decided are the most important to be shared, especially as an anonymous source. Like, I'll never get to ask these people for follow-up. I'll never get to know more about their perspective. And so this little snippet is what I've been given. And I think that's a gift. I'm really like blessed and feel really lucky to have had the opportunity to kind of share these words for people. And I'm hoping to be able to create more than the 6 pieces that I made for this show. So hopefully it's a work in progress. Anyway, that is all I have. Thank you for listening to my presentation on ideas, ideals, criticism, and concerns.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jillian. I'm going to hand it over to Kel for her presentation on her exhibition.
Okay, great. Hi, let me get everything. Let me get myself set here. Fantastic. Okay. Everyone can hear me? Everything's good to go? Awesome. Hi, I am Kel Mur, and I am so excited to be here and to be talking to everybody and presenting with my fellow bridgework artist, Gillian Drier, this evening. So a little bit about me. I just graduated with my Master of Fine Arts from UW-Madison this last May. So that happened, and really big victory in this context and day and time during these times. I consider myself a conceptual artist. So in short, I try to generate metaphors in the gallery by selecting very certain materials and then manipulating those materials in very particular ways. I look for a lot of meaning in what material I'm using and how I approach manipulating or making something from that material. So I look to put together a show based on what the work is actually made out of and then how I made the work. It's very poetic, I know. So to get started, in November of 2019, I was diagnosed with a really large uterine fibroid. So I had surgery scheduled for May and it was delayed in the times of COVID. So to move on with my life or try and make up for time, the following summer, I returned to a gardening and landscaping job in Oregon that I had also done the previous year for a professor that I worked for at UW as well. And the isolation of quarantine, coupled with working alone outside, was an opportunity to be fully present in my body when I was sort of really contemplating what was happening to me with this large fibroid. And in that alone time and in working my body, sort of a walking or laboring meditation, if you will, I was able to sort through a lot of thoughts, many things I had left unturned or unprocessed in my brain. The property that I'm worked on, which is in this photograph here, is actually bordered on 2 sides by a neighboring farm that grows, I think alternates between growing corn and soy. So through the seasons, I watched these 2 fields grow from seed, be harvested for their corn and then for their silage, and then finally turned over back into the earth. So as I said before, so far my surgery has been delayed. It's been delayed 3 times. I have a current date in February that as of right now is approved, but pending because of other health issues that may or may not be related to the fibroid. The work you see in front of you is made from the abandoned corn stalks from one of the fields in the previous image. So I collected them after the farmer had abandoned maybe 2 rows or so. I collected them with the help of my fabulous partner and kept them moist enough to work with, much like someone who was making or weaving baskets or anything out of a fiber would need to keep the material pliable in order to make it so I could make this enormous abstraction. So this object is about 12 feet long by 5 feet wide. And thank goodness ALL has a parking ramp, because I was working upstairs in their education studio and this could barely fit through the doors. So this fibroid has been looming over me now for over a year. So solutions and waiting and just laboriously trying to figure out and prioritize my life. So since it's been sort of this cloud over me, and it also explains a lot of other sensations that I was having in my body that I didn't particularly understand. Through working with this material, I was trying to make sense of what was happening in my body, and was really fascinated by how my body was trying to construct this tumor. So uterine fibroids are non-cancerous or benign tumors that grow from the uterine lining. They can grow inside the uterus, or they can grow up into the abdominal cavity, which is what happened to me, which is why it's so large and went so undetected for so long. So I was really trying to process why my body was doing this, how my body was doing this, and how it was twisting all the uterine fibers, all my muscle fibers into this growth and into this mass that I've just sort of been living with, that feels sort of like just this deadness or this fullness inside of me. They don't really know why fibroids happen. They've examined diet. Some believe that it's the harboring of emotional, spiritual, physical trauma. But the best way that I could think of processing this for myself was weaving this and just to examine what my body was doing. And the sheer size of it was a goal of mine, just to translate how domineering the presence both inside of my body and in my life that this has had. Here are just some detail shots, other angles of the weaving and close-ups as well. So I left some of the corn fibers in there. I just sort of wanted to leave the material as close to how I found it as possible, just to have that transparency about what materials I'm using. So the title, the corn dolly for the Cailleach, heralds from Celtic lore. As much of my family, our roots are from Ireland and Scotland, among other places. We're Euromutts for sure, but a big chunk of it is from the Celtic area up there. So a little bit about corn dollies. A corn dolly is made by a farmer. It's the last harvest of his crop. So he makes this corn dolly and he passes it, or she or they, excuse me, will pass it from farmer to farmer as they also finish their crops. And then the last farmer to wind up with this corn dolly has to care for it throughout the winter. The corn dolly resembles, can resemble a bunch of things: a cornucopia, a person, or a face. It can be abstract or literal or figurative, but the farmer that lands on it to care for it, it's channeling the energy of a really ancient, very powerful creation deity called the Cailleach, who is the winter goddess in that lore. She embraces us to process our shadow sides. She is sort of this bringer of death. She is a reaper, but in that death, it's believed, although very intense and can be very painful, it is an opportunity to examine and come out into a place of rebirth. So this artifact of my meditation on what's happening in my body is sort of my prayer to her, a spell, if you will, if you want to go there, but really an offering or a wish to please help my body heal and start again as well. These images are prints that are in the gallery of the MRI that was taken of me in my abdomen last January. So things may have changed a little bit, but it's probably just bigger, even more amorphous than it presents here. So these prints of the mass are up in relation to other videos that I'll get to later, just so the viewer can have a point of reference of what I'm actually talking about. So just to clarify, an average uterus measures 3 to 4 inches by 2.5 inches. My uterus has overall measurements of 8 inches, a little over 8 inches, almost 5 inches by 6 inches. The fibroid itself measures a little over 7.5 inches by a little over 4 inches by 6 inches. And then there's a white segment at the top of it that you'll see sort of like this weird cloud or fruit piece shape that measures 4 inches by 2 inches by 4 inches, where the fibroid has likely outgrown its blood supply and started to die. There are also 2 other fibroids, which don't particularly have a place in this exhibition, and are hard to see in this MRI. But once you have one fibroid, you're very likely to produce other ones, even if they're smaller. So I'm going to stop for 1 second and play a little bit of this video that's in the gallery. It's called Landscape. So most mornings, this is my view. I wake up and feel compelled to look at my belly and its silhouette. And from the outside, I can see that the right side is higher than the left as a result of the way that the mass is growing in my abdomen. A lot of the times I'll wiggle it around. I will flex my abdominal muscles just to see like where it is. And this is very literally a video of that. This video winds up filling the space with my breath, and it echoes in the really beautiful open space that is the ALL gallery. So not only does it generate this immediate intimacy with the images that you're seeing, but it also animates the large weaving that's in there in between the 2 videos. And I'll show you the other one in a second. Instead of it just being sort of this lifeless weaving, it makes me feel like it turns more into a sleeping monster or something. It gives life to it for sure. For this second video, I'll play this just for a moment as well. I'll actually be fast forwarding through this video since it's a little longer than the last one. There really isn't sound to really be heard, so you might just hear some sort of like background noise, but it's not important. And that is lipstick. It's a tube of lipstick. Okay, great. Kind of sounds like there's still sound. Is it? Okay. So these are the stills of that video, so we don't have to keep playing it. I personally struggle a lot with this video. I thought it was really important to make, but it was really a hard piece for me to do. I've always been really interested in what I perceive to be symbols of feminine narcissism, which here I symbolize with the lipstick. And I've worked with symbols like this before in my practice. In this video, I'm examining my abdomen. I'm trying to find the edges of the fibroid with my hands, which a gynecologist will do pretty regularly in examination. Then I trace over it with this red lipstick. I have been so self-conscious of the belly that I have and that this mass has given me. And I've even been asked if I'm pregnant before, which is a really awkward conversation, especially when they're a customer where I bartend. This video is the strongest or I feel is the strongest and most direct or literal effort to show or to make seen the internal landscape into the external, which is sort of the whole point of this show, is to funnel that out, the internal into the external. I battle so much with it because I think as somebody who presents as a woman and identifies as a woman and lives in the society as a woman, I think that we're programmed to really question how much of our pleasing or displeasing features are our fault. And I found myself a lot of the time being like, well, was my diet bad? Did I eat too much red meat? Did I drink too much? Was I too stressed out? How much of this is my fault and how much of this was just going to happen anyway? And a lot of the time, it's hard not to feel ashamed, and it's hard not to feel like there is something very, very wrong with me, or that there is something incredibly unattractive about me in this way. And this is an installation shot of this work with the other two MRI shots, and of course, the sculpture in the middle. So as I previously mentioned, my surgeries are postponed at the moment. And I'm really excited to have this work in the Art Lit Lab space, because I feel like so many other women or people with uteruses are going through this same thing, and that the medical community just doesn't know why this happens and hasn't really dedicated a whole lot of research to it, regardless of how many people go through this. And most of the solutions are surgical, and even to the point of hysterectomy, instead of trying to figure out why this happens and how to prevent it. So I guess with that, I feel for you if you're going through this as well. And thank you for listening and being here.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kel. And if you're just joining us, we are currently hosting the Bridgework Artist Talk with artists Gillian Drier and Kel Mur, and we're going to open it up to questions now. I will start with some of my own, but if you have any questions for either artist, please feel free to put them in the comment box and I'll pass them on. Jillian, I'll start with a question for you. What initially made you interested in doing a community-based project?
Well, I've always, I don't want to say always, for a long time, I've had a fascination with community responses. My senior year of school, I had to do my senior thesis, and it was one of the first projects that I had, surprisingly, because it was right at the end of the year, where we could do anything we wanted, no holds barred, like anything. And so I decided to do a project on online dating and the racism and sexism that women have experienced there. And it's a lot of people. It was a really kind of shocking project. And it was one of the first projects I did where I kind of opened it up. I sent out a Survey Monkey. And of course, I had the questions that I had, and then I had a lot of open, like, leave notes if there's something else you want to add to this that I didn't ask you. And I think when I was finished with all of those responses, I had, I think it was 14 pages of comments that men had left these women that I'd polled of just kind of the worst things you've ever heard, you know, anywhere from threats to just like blatant racism, blatant sexism, like, and it was shocking. And I realized at that point, like, there are so many experiences that we all collectively have that we're just not really talking about. And like, how would you know? You know what I'm like? You think maybe most women experience sexism on, you know, dating apps, but you're not sure. And then you see these numbers. And I think after that, it really just opened up, I don't want to say a fascination, but kind of rethinking how the art that I can make can share other people's narratives more than just my own. Especially when I'm given a platform to hopefully make positive change or have people think about problems that I think are worth talking about. I think it's like imperative almost to share. And so I've always wanted to hear what other people have to say about things and give them the space to do that and hopefully communicate what they have to say as well in a way that does what they've had to say, like justice. So it's always kind of since then been something that's on my mind as far as community projects.
Powerfully put. Kel, I've got a question for you. Can you explain and expand a little bit more on the themes in your work and in this exhibition that are sort of tied to the cycle of land and agriculture, especially in relation to the title of the exhibition, Reap, and your sculpture with the corn dolly?
Oh, yeah, of course. So I feel like I was trying to figure out a nice way to talk about surgery and actually getting this out of my body. I think that the title describes both the actual physical labor that I was doing to collect the material, and then what would be the extraction, or what they call a myomectomy, which is the technical term for the surgery to remove the fibroid. I guess it was sort of a dark joke with myself at the same time as well, for thinking about an organ that's usually referred to as the womb, as something that is fertile, as something that is quote unquote biologically programmed to create life, but instead is creating something that is lifeless and that essentially is dead material. I think that tying that back to the land and finding a lot of solace and a lot of comfort and stillness with watching that field grow, and also the land that I was working change. There were so many times where I was just with myself. And I think that although the pandemic is horrendous and awful and stressful, there are certain moments of beauty where we have had to go back to being alone and with ourselves. And I think that I've always been really interested in the cycles of both life and the surrounding earth. I think that those themes tie together with a lot of other things that I do, which I don't have to get in right now, but I have a food project that's also surrounds menstruation, that sort of talks a lot or parallels the act of the harvest or the nutritional value of food with what nutritional value also lives in the body. And I think that I'm really interested in the closeness that we can achieve or feel with the materials and the world around us. I also think that reaping and harvesting and just agriculture in general you can't separate those things from human existence. We would not be where we are without the development of agriculture. And obviously there's a lot of caveats there, and that's a huge discussion, but I think in the interest that I have in both my own body and hopefully how that can expand out in for someone else to see themselves in what I'm going through and whatever body of work it is, I think that I think you just can't escape the surrounding your surroundings or nature or anything like that. I just think that we're much closer than we typically remember that we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And along the lines of agriculture. Jillian, the book you mentioned, Farming While Black, I believe it was titled. I know that you consulted a lot of sources or were directed, excuse me, to consult a lot of sources by the responses to the question that you posed. And I know that some of them may have also inspired you to approach the topic of Black power and Black futures. And can you tell us a little bit more about the sources that you came across throughout this process?
Sure. I was hoping to get maybe a slightly wider variety, but it was really open-ended. So most of the responses were people's own words, which I appreciated because it's nice to hear what people have to say directly. And then conversely, it's wonderful when people maybe think they don't have the right words, but they have something that communicates it just as well. And so there were a number of books that I have somewhere in a folder that I hoped to read, and I ordered some. And I had a list of audiobooks as well, because sometimes I'm a lazy reader. But one of the other books, actually I have it, right here, because I was looking at it earlier, is called Beyond Survival. This was like one of the best books I've read in a really long time, and actually might as well plug it. There's a discussion on this book like right after this from the press that released it. And that book was on Transform It. It's a collection of essays. So I really liked that because I think it had like 14 different authors and editors that wrote about different topics. I don't want to get too like heavy with the conversation because I'm not sure who's watching. Content warnings, but there was talking about how to avoid calling the police with like domestic situations and moving to post-prison society, and these really I don't want to say like fringe ideas. I think for a lot of people, you kind of talk about these ideas and you're not sure how to actually get there. And so I really like this book because it like outlined that these things actually are possible and they don't have to be fringe ideas, and that they can easily, I mean, I'm saying easily with the caveat of like everyone participates and works towards these things, but that they can become like central and doable, and that they would objectively make society better. And so I really appreciated getting sources like this that are somewhat like academic in how they, I don't want to say it wasn't quite academic, but more instructional on how to make society better. So I feel like there was kind of two categories. One was more just like I'm sharing my experience, I'm sharing my frustrations, I'm sharing my ideas. And then there was another category, which was like, here's how we do it. And so it was a nice combination to kind of have that. I think we have these conversations and it's so overwhelming to think about all the stuff that needs to get done to make society better for everyone. And you kind of like end up sticking your head in the sand. You're like, is this even doable? Like, there's so much, I don't even know where to start. And this project for me was a really good way to like slow down, like take in different sources at a time and like reevaluate how I'm thinking about this whole process of making the changes that we need to make, I think, as a society. So it was just a good like self-exercise.
Thank you for that. And the book that you mentioned was Beyond Survival. Would you mind sharing the author's name as well?
Yes, it is. I'm probably going to say these incorrectly, so apologies. It is edited by Ajaris Dixon and Leah Lakshmi and Peepsna Samarasina. Sorry, this is probably going to be backwards, but these are the editors. And then there's multiple contributors. So wonderful. It's a really good book. I totally recommend reading this one if I was going to pick one to share.
Thank you for that suggestion. And if you're just joining us, I'll remind you that if you have any questions for Jillian or Kel, feel free to pop them in the chat at any point and I'll pass them on. Kel, question for you. The concept that is the basis of this exhibition, your fibroid, is really centered in both something that's deeply personal to you and to others who may experience this condition, as well as something that's really almost a scientific health-based concept that some may be unfamiliar with. So can you talk a little bit about what you as an artist would like the viewer, perhaps someone unfamiliar with fibroids, to take away from this show?
Yeah, I think that that's actually, that was one of the challenges of putting the show together, first of all, was, and I feel like I actually come across that challenge a lot in my work because I tend to make such personal work, currently anyway, in the last few years. So yeah, I guess like it is like a very scientific, it is a very scientific or medical topic. And again, like with the, can you repeat the question or just like the main meat of the question one more time? I just want to make sure that I answer it properly.
Yeah, of course. I just am interested in what you as an artist would like viewers who may be unfamiliar with the concept of fibroids, either from a medical standpoint or a personal standpoint, to kind of take away from this exhibition.
Yeah, so main takeaways, I think, the first thing that comes from my brain is like, I guess the immediacy of, I mean, I'm so frustrated. I really am so incredibly frustrated. I'm frustrated on many levels. I'm frustrated that my surgery keeps getting delayed. I'm frustrated that it's not, I mean, though I'm not currently dying from it, technically, I have a myriad of other things that it is interfering with, including if I wanted to get pregnant, I can't. It's really frustrating that I know of other surgeries that have taken place that could arguably be the same priority as mine. And because of the nature of it, it is still considered an elective surgery. I think that it's both amazing and slightly humorous and horrifying how big this thing is in my belly, and how much of my mental space it takes up, which is why everything in that room is larger than life. And I guess a lot of the things that I do are because I know I'm not a special snowflake, right? Like I'm just like, I know that if I'm going through it as a human being, statistically, there's a million other people going through it. And I think for the sake of those people, and that I made my issue enormous and filled an entire room with a lot of windows. And I was like, this is what's happening to me. And now everyone's going to look at it, because it's really frustrating to also know chronically that women's health issues or any health research or issues that are not about a male body are chronically under-researched, and don't have solutions or reasons to why. Anything having to do with menstrual health, to things that happen in pregnancy, to even things like, I don't know, down to things like chromosomes and how actual like sex organs get formed. I mean, it's there, the lack of research about all of that, the things that we think we know, it's really abhorrent how much we don't know about women's bodies. And I think that women are suffering every day because of it. People with uteruses are suffering every day because of it. And it makes me really angry. And so I made a really big show about it.
Yes. Thank you for that answer to a very personal question. Jillian, I know you mentioned earlier in your presentation that you have a background in graphic design, and I know throughout this process you've talked about marrying sort of your two artistic worlds. And you know, how do you think this project does that, or did you end up sort of moving away from that line of thought of the two coming together?
I think I started somewhere, I shifted away, and then I kind of like shimmied on back just a touch. Initially, my idea was to make, what's the right word? Like a catalog, almost, a magazine type spread, that would be really direct in translating what was happening and what people were saying, and the sources. And I still think I want to do that at some point. And it also came down to time. I mean, just realistically, laying out books is something I love to do. And laying out spreads is something I love doing. I think it's It's just something I find really entertaining, which I'm sure layout designers everywhere are like cringing. They're like, why would you enjoy this? Um, but I find that there can be so much power in design, and good design, and that it can communicate. I mean, it communicates everything. And so I had this like notion that that's how I wanted to communicate, because that's how I know best, to communicate when I have something I really want to share. And as I spend more time doing the digital collages, like I shared before, that's how I kind of started my process with sketches and coloring, and making these grids and making these things that actually fit into grids and need to fit together hypothetically if I wanted to like attach them together. I realized that I think it was like firing the same part of my brain that is set off for the graphic design order that I really love, and that structure that I really crave to make sense out of things. And so I decided that maybe a book like wasn't necessarily the best way to communicate when I wanted to communicate, which is shocking for me. It was like a revelation. I was like, can't be done. And so I moved into these things that are on the same level, the kind of in a very like parallel universe kind of way. The same kind of process that design has in certain ways. Again, designers are probably like cringing, but there is the order, there's the structure, there's the planning. There was a little bit of math of like measuring the bead widths and making sure that they would fit in some spots. And I had to grid everything out a few times to make sure it would fit. And so I kind of landed and decided like, this is doing the same thing for me that I thought design would do. And I still had to think about how I was going to lay out the words alongside those. So that was a little bit of my design practice. Ended up being really simple. I just, I didn't want any like flares or bells. I wanted to be really straightforward, which is often how I design. Anyway, I'd like to revisit the idea of like cataloging now that I have artwork to go with it as well. I don't think it's like out of the question. But it's always funny when you talk to artists about where their starting points are and then where they land. Sometimes it's like a whole 180. But that's why I appreciated this process. I tried to be a little bit more like open-minded with my process this time around. I did a lot of editing. I have like 4 pieces that I ended up not using or started and tossed. And that's a new thing for me, to be a little bit more critical about how I approach these things. So I think there was some design type thinking approach, I guess you could say.
Absolutely. Kel, on the lines of process, can you take us a little bit more through the process of weaving that large sculpture? Your method, it's just such a physical object that's kind of hard to deny once you're in the space with it. And it's interesting to think about how that came about.
Well, I will say that I'm not a weaver. I'm not a crafts person. I don't think myself as one. I feel like every show is a different material, and I kind of like it that way. I think going into it, I was like, well, if I can't make it good, I'll just make it big, which really fit with what I was trying to do anyway. I think it came out better than I thought it would. But there was a lot of tests with like other material from the same land, or neighboring land. And I thought there would actually be a lot more like materials involved, or multiple weavings. But again, as Jillian was just saying, like it just got edited down. And I feel like that's something that I do quite a bit, is I like have a lot of things, and then all of a sudden like the show I put on is like really stark, or just really sort of austere in that way. Yeah, it was a really physical process. And my hands really hurt. And like when I was doing it, I would come home after like 7 hours of weaving, and just my hands would just be killing me. I think that I'm kind of a glutton for feeling that kind of reaction in my body from making work. I think that it makes me feel like I'm in the work, or that I'm just really actually making something. And I think that I get so much satisfaction from that as an artist that I always kind of come back to making after doing something that's performative, because it's just, I need my hands in it. Like I need that physical sensation. And I just think like it was, I know that the C word catharsis is not really welcome in the capital A art community, but I think that working through it in that way and trying to understand what my body was doing in this very particular instance, it was just one corn stalk after another, and like, how can I make it bigger, and like, what's going on? Just really taking that time and really pushing physically in that space. And I mean, I guess I would come in and out of it. There's these things called podcasts that we all really enjoy. But like, I mean, I just think that like I need to feel in the work. And I think that there's sort of an exorcism in using processes and materials for me to just try and manifest what my ideas are, this physical manifestation. And really, I think it also comes down to a kind of research. I think that the way that I make work is actually very research driven, whether that be statistically or knowledge based, or actually getting my hands in the dirt, as they say, and just physically being in it and present for it is important to me, or tends to be important to me. So to find a process like weaving that felt very akin to muscle fibers coming together. I think it also started with what healing after surgery would be like. So thinking about, and then my surgery got postponed. So originally the show was going to be more about healing and trying to figure out what kind of work I could make while I was unable to push my body to any limit, which was a whole other puzzle for me. But I think it was thinking about the bodily process that really solidified in selecting weaving. And I think that just in sort of this microcosm to macrocosm, like we have like this microscopic weaving that happens in muscle fibers and healing in bodies. And then it's everywhere in sort of this, if we look at nature or spider webs, and I feel like there's something so magical there. And then just to bring it into a gallery space. So how do you solve that puzzle? And I think that was definitely the solution I came up with, but also granted because I was spending time with that material, and I actually watched that material birth and die, right? So I actually watched the cornfields like come alive, and then I watched the end of their life. And I think that this goes back to the first question, actually. So because I actually thought of this too, and they just come together, but looking at what that leftover material was and understanding, or trying to understand, that my body is hoarding excess estrogen, which is what makes the fibroid, generates the tumor. So to marry those things together very literally was sort of this solution to the query that I had, and how do I start to make a show about this? And then the rest of that, so that was the original thought. And then the videos came later, and then trying to, and this goes back to the other question, trying to contextualize that and like, okay, well, how do I inform the viewer to the best of my ability without doing all the work for you? Sorry. But like, having the MRIs there, because like, even when I got those printed, they were like, is this a baby? And I was like, this is a really awkward question, but no, not at all. So I hope that answered the question, but it really felt like such a metaphorical mirroring of the biological processes that I was looking at.
We have just a few more questions, so I'll remind any viewers watching that if you have any questions for the artists, please do not hesitate to put them in the comment box and I'll pass them on. Jillian, I'm really interested to hear if you have an answer to your own question that you posed to people in your project, and how the idea of what Black futures may mean to you specifically developed throughout your work on this show.
That's really funny. That's like the first time I've thought about it almost. Shockingly. It's such a loaded question. And now I think about asking people questions that I know are hard questions. I'm really interested in Afrofuturism. It's that's a Reddit channel, like a subreddit, where actually is one of the places where I post the forum for people to ask in that Reddit community and a couple other Reddit communities. And it's it's a category of, it's not always exclusively, but it's a category of like sci-fi. And I always thought that was just so cool. I mean, it's not really a realistic answer. But I think it does go to this category of like not just like surviving, but just like being like beyond, like just above and beyond anything. And I, it's like the idea of like shooting for the stars, and that right now people are like barely making it. And I'm saying people, I'm not talking about everyone, and everyone has different struggles, and we all have different like intersectional identities that are either helping us or hindering us get to these ideals. But I've daydreamed like there's no white supremacy. There's no legacies of white supremacy. There's no legacies of like capitalism that, causes people to think that like working is more important than like their health, and those ideas are, being talked about more and more, like how can we actually achieve these things in a practical way. But I don't know. I mean, it just makes me smile to think about it, because I've seen so many people out here like struggling, and myself included, like emotionally, you know what I mean? I'm really lucky to have great coworkers, but in the height of the protests in the summer, there were days I couldn't work. Like, like my brain wasn't working. Like it was shut down. I had a lot of conversations. I started seeing a therapist in the summer. I had a lot of one-on-one conversations with my therapist. And I remember feeling so lucky that I have a Black woman therapist to talk to who gets it, who like I can trust 100%, who listens, who gives feedback, who can be honest with me. And that not everyone has access to that. So some people are out here just struggling, and they're struggling in their own funnels, and that's unacceptable. So like this all comes back to in a big circle. I mean, I could talk forever, but like healthcare, mental health care. I mean, it's the things that we always address. Like, I think that these like foundational needs need to be met at minimum. And we're not even close to there yet. I mean, we're still arguing about whether or not people deserve to have healthcare. Like, what in the world? So when I pose this question to people, some people literally said, I cannot fathom it, because we are so far away from even being halfway there that I don't even know, like, where do we start? What do I do? Like, how can we even talk about it when people are still dying because insulin prices are too high? You know what I mean? So the conversation, I think I would start at base saying like those minimum needs need to get met in my ideal future. And then we start to, dismantle the systems that are, it's such a cliche thing to say, but it's real. Dismantling systems that are, holding people back and killing people, to be frank about it. So that's why I'm hopefully reading more books like this that will give me the resources to actually feel like I can do something and not feel so helpless as far as the overwhelmingness that comes with talking about these things. So reading the book about farming and reading this book about people saying like, yeah, we can do this, and here's how, have been very grounding. And I really recommend that podcasts, playlists like that for anyone who's also kind of struggling with the overwhelmed feeling, because it is somewhat manageable. And there are things that we can be doing collectively.
And Jillian, there's a follow-up question from a viewer. Would translating the exhibit to the magazine format narrow, expand, or in any other way change the underlying messages or creative research scope of your project?
That's a really, really good question. And I think that's always the challenge of design projects. Let me think in my head before I say the next thing I'm going to say.
Take your time.
I think, like, I don't want to like say something I don't mean. I think what I would imagine most designers think about whenever we're starting like a new project is, well, let me jump back. The first thing that anyone says, and anytime I'm working with someone on a project, a lot of times they ask if I can like sketch out some ideas or bring something to the table before we've kind of like discussed I'm thinking about like freelance clients, I'm thinking about my job, I'm thinking about anyone I've worked with in the past. And I always tell them that the message and the content have to come first. Like there's no, like that doesn't flex ever. I'm never going to make a sketch. I'm never going to lay something out. I'm never going to choose like a typeface or like whatever, choose graphics for anything until there's a really clear dialogue about what's happening. And the reason is because the goal of design is to like communicate something that's already been clarified. It's the joke people have about clients not knowing what they're talking about. And so you make this like really horrible thing because no one knows what's going on. And so the reason I say that is I think it would expand it. I think it would be a good thing. And it would be a good thing if I was doing my design process properly. Of listening to the messages and thinking like, what is the best possible way that I can communicate what's being communicated to me? I mean, it's translation. And so I guess there's always the possibility that I don't do it justice and it comes out worse, or it's challenging. Another part of that is having to edit, and it feels kind of yucky, like picking and choosing words that people have given to you. Just like, I don't know if that makes sense. Like someone's bearing their soul and then you kind of have to decide like, yeah, but is this going to like make the cut, because sometimes there's not room to include everything. And so you have to edit, and it feels really, really hard to edit other people's ideas and dreams and desires and like fears and all this stuff. And so it's challenging. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I didn't want to jump into that right away, is because I wanted to think about it a little bit more. And this project deserved a ton of care. And I didn't want to rush it just because I wanted an end result, because that's like greedy design. And it's not worth it to sacrifice like the integrity of the project or the integrity of what's being said because I wanted an outcome. And so that's another reason why I didn't quite jump into it right away. And I've been thinking about it over the last few weeks and months, thinking more carefully about if I was going to do this project, it would have to be like a commitment to the time needed to do it properly, to give people like justice. So to answer your question, it is a mixed answer. If I did it right, I think it would be a really, really great expansion. And if I rushed it, or I, didn't really think really critically about what I was communicating, then it could be potentially disastrous or dishonest or not a good project. So I'm gonna sit on it and think on it a little bit more. I think I'd like to, because I still have a passion for like layout and making things come to life a little bit. But that's a good question. Thank you.
And I have one final question, unless there are any audience members or viewers that have another question to add in the comment box. And this is for both of you. I recall that during one of our very earliest conversations in this process of the both of you figuring out your exhibition concepts, I believe that you both referenced the concept of trauma, whether that be physical trauma, generational trauma, or other types of trauma. And I would love to hear from both of you if you could expand a little bit on that concept, and if and how that concept manifested itself in your separate bodies of work. Kel, if you don't mind going first.
Sure. This is something I think a lot about, actually, and it's like a side project and side research that's happening. This was just the most immediate and clear body of work that was going to be ready for this show. Sometimes it's a practical decision. So I do think in some ways it came out in this work. I think I wanted to pay some kind of tribute to like, or I wanted to find a root that was linked to my lineage in some way, which I think is sort of how the Kaliach came through. It was sort of serendipitous because I was sort of doing the harvesting and things. And then I had a friend, Kate Richards, who's a wonderful local artist, we were talking about that. And I realized that I was sort of channeling that part, or how I feel. And this is going to sound super woo-woo to some people, but I was like, oh, I'm like totally channeling my Celtic roots here. Like I'm into it. I think that when it comes to generational trauma, I don't think that personally I disbelieve how trauma can settle in your body. And I think that whether it be from our parents or beyond, the research that I have done says that a traumatic event can span 3 generations. It actually can change your DNA, and you pass that on to your offspring, and then that offspring will pass it on to their offspring. That's happened in Holocaust survivors. It's actually been proven in science. And I think that when I make my work, I think a lot about my mom, quite frankly, and the trauma that she has. I think it comes across, not that anyone would know this, but in the belly video with the lipstick, really reminds me of my mother and the body image issues that she had, and how that got absorbed by me as a young person. And I think that it has shaped who I am. And I think that whatever weirdness my parents transmitted to me is partially why my practice is the way that it is. And I just don't think it's escapable. And I think that in some ways it definitely came out in this show. I thought it was going to be a little more about the Jewishness that I wanted to explore, but it just didn't take that route. My mother also had a lot of issues in this area. She died of uterine cancer. So I don't disbelieve the manifestation of generational trauma. I know it sounds magical and woo-woo, but it feels right to me. And in my personal experience, I do think that we have to deal with the things that the generations before us dealt with. And I think that we can grow, or we can pass them on to our offspring, but I do think that they have to be dealt with for sure. It might not be obvious, but I do think it came out in this show. I do.
Thank you for that answer. Jillian, if you don't mind answering the questions well.
Sorry, I'm having like a throat thing happening right now. Yeah, kind of just transitioning out of what Kel said, I very much agree about the damage being passed down. That's one of the reasons I started seeing a therapist this last year. I think it's hard. Trauma is becoming one of those kind of buzzwords that I think people, I don't want to say throw around, but throw around a little bit. And on the other hand, I think it's serious, because I think people are starting to recognize that there's a lot more trauma that people have than is talked about. People are starting to realize like, oh, this like X, Y, and Z that happened to me or that I experienced is not normal and is not acceptable or okay. And it is okay that has caused damage that I'm identifying, and so I'm talking from personal experience here. Like, I experienced these things and I was like, this is fine. Like I'm stronger because of it, kind of like toxic, whatever thinking. And I recently realized in the last like year that a lot of those things were affecting the way that I was living. And even though I consider myself to be like a successful, like high functioning person, those things definitely were kind of leaching into the way I existed. And earlier in this project, we were talking about trauma as part of these projects. Like, it's just, I get so mad talking about, like I just ranted about not 15 minutes ago about these issues, because they're so like absurd. Not that, of course, like we understand US history, so we understand like, of course, these legacies and things are by design. but I get so mad that we acknowledge them, that is how they are supposed to be, and they still haven't been fixed yet. You know what I mean? It's so frustrating to acknowledge a broken piece of something and then leave it there. That's how I feel about it. And I wanted this project to kind of be the counter of that. I think trauma and healing go hand in hand, just like light and darkness do. Like they're kind of like, there's kind of only one or the other, or healing during, like, from a traumatic situation. But I wanted this project to be like positive. I wanted it to be about healing maybe a little bit more. I mean, it's both. I can't just talk about healing and not talk about trauma. And clearly, like some of the responses I got were like disbelief, essentially, because like it's been so ingrained that the society, the way it is causing some people to fail, and again by design. And that's so frustrating to me. So I wanted to make this project that would allow people to just openly express like a trauma-free existence through generations, talking about themselves if that wasn't the case for themselves, or for their children, or for just like an imaginary future that they're not even a part of. And so I guess trauma definitely works its way into the conversation, because we're talking about Black existence in the United States. I mean, all of it is traumatic for people, and it manifests itself in pretty like sinister ways, I think. So in my artist statement, I said I wanted to create like beautiful objects, even if it was talking about the damage and the hard things. And that's part of like the tapestry I was trying to create a little bit, or the quilt I was trying to create, that all these things go hand in hand, and they can't really exist without one another. And that's okay. So it was challenging. It was definitely hard and very like emotional. I think me and Kel, I don't want to speak for Kel, but I think we both had probably pretty emotional projects that we worked on, and we both talked about trauma in our own ways, in our own lives. So it's, yeah, it's there for sure. It's in there.
Well, thank you both so much for answering that question, along with all the other questions posed to you tonight, and for coming to this artist talk. And thank you all for watching and viewing this talk. And a big thank you as well to James Krell, who has been our technical coordinator for the evening. We're lucky to have him. If anyone watching would like to see these exhibitions, they are on display at Arts and Literature Laboratory until February 27th. Please check our website for gallery hours. That has the most current information. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a good night. Thank you again to Jillian and Kel.